Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of the Fair Housing Insiders. Today, we're going to be talking about employees and their fair housing responsibilities. What should you expect from them? Let's dive right in. Hello, property managers and housing providers. This is another episode of the Fair Housing Insiders. As always, I'm your host, Michael Coughlin. And with me today is fair housing attorney Leslie Tucker. Leslie, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, glad to be here as always, Michael.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about, the foundation of all housing providers, which is housing employees, and what you should really expect from them when it comes to fair housing incidents, reporting, day-to-day operations. So I guess it would make sense for us to start on the big picture. So when we talk about compliance, most people are thinking about policies, training documents, a lot of stuff that starts from the top. But let's go ahead and focus, at kind of the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, but the role that employees play in upholding their fair housing protections. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit, Leslie?
Well, yeah, I mean, as we all know, employees are the front line. They're the ones that are interacting with residents, the prospects, vendors, even neighbors of your property. So their behavior, their words, and of course, their decisions can either support compliance or create liability for the company and themselves. Courts and HUD don't just look at what the company says out loud or in their policies. It's what your people do that really matter.
Right. So those policies, what you want out of your employees needs to be clearly defined and reinforced, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about today. And mainly three kind of key expectations every employee should understand.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I guess let's talk about that first expectation. And it's one of my personal favorites, obviously, and it's fair housing training. Obviously, if you've listened to our channel, training is important. Hopefully you've taken some of ours. But Leslie, can you kind of break down why it's so critical that training is kind of an ongoing operation for your employees versus just kind of a one-time thing when they get started?
Right. And I know that that's common is just, some companies have sort of just this one requirement when you're onboarding to take training. And the reason that doesn't make sense is because laws change over time. The trends change, kind of what different HUD administrations are focused and targeting. Employee turnover is very common, especially in this industry. So if someone only received fair housing training during their orientation, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago, they're very likely missing key updates. They may not remember, what the law is or how to apply it when they learned it 3 years ago. So ongoing training helps reinforce these correct behaviors. It provides updated guidance on current issues like emotional support animals and things like criminal background screening, for example.
Always really complicated topics. Yeah. And I know, but obviously, hopefully, those of you out there really pay attention to the changes in fair housing laws and policy. HUD puts out a lot of memos and letters every single year on various fair housing related issues. Some of them are rather minor and some of them are major. And I know we have to do our own diligence, even though we very much are familiar with this material, we have to do our own due diligence in making sure that we're up to date on everything. Last year, HUD produced a few memos. And because of that, we had to go in and comb through our online training courses to make sure that we, had to make sure everything was updated within fair housing laws, best practices, and the environment as it changes over time. I think that reinforces the point that refresher training can prevent a lot of those problems from kind of slipping through the cracks before they start. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and most of the violations that I see in my practice aren't malicious. They're the result of just an employee not knowing any better, right? So regular scenario-based training keeps fair housing kind of at the top of mind. So, it's refreshed and it can really prevent costly missteps.
Couldn't agree more. The next expectation we're going to talk about is asking for help, which can be complicated in almost any professional setting. So I understand, but I think that's why it's important we talk about it today. When an employee is uncertain why it's so important that they stop and check in before acting, can you kind of walk us through that one?
Simply because assumptions lead to mistakes. Fair housing law isn't necessarily common sense. It isn't necessarily always intuitive. So what feels like, being helpful to a prospect or an applicant could actually be a violation, and an employee just may not know it. For example, recommending a certain building away from families with children, or maybe inaccurately answering a question about assistance animals and that process. So if an employee is ever unsure whether it's how to respond to a disability request, or maybe whether a statement raises red flags in their mind, they need to feel empowered and encouraged to say, hey, I'm not exactly sure about that. Let me check with my supervisor.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know, especially like some employees, especially when they're new, they're getting used to things. Maybe they feel a little intimidated to ask questions because it makes them feel like, oh, well, I'm basically telling my boss that I don't know what to do here. But this is kind of where it flips onto management to set that expectation or create that culture where asking questions are not just welcome, but it's encouraged. I'm sure every manager out there would rather their employee take a second and ask them a question and clarify before making a big decision that, and we're talking about fair housing violations, can cost a ton of money and be a giant headache. The fact that someone's received training does not make them an expert in any subject within housing. I've been doing this for many, many, many years, and I still need to ask questions about certain details of fair housing law and best practice. So it's never about that you don't know enough. It's about taking the right steps to protect yourself, to protect your company, to protect your property, and do best by your residents. Wouldn't you say it helps them better identify when a situation may need a second look?
Yes, precisely. Supervisors need to normalize the idea that asking questions isn't a weakness, it's professionalism. So the worst thing an employee could do is just guess their way through a fair housing situation.
Yeah, obviously. Okay. Well, the next expectation we're going to talk about is, again, incredibly important part of the process when it comes to fair housing issues is reporting incidents. So, Leslie, what should employees do if they see or hear something that could be a potential fair housing concern?
First and foremost, they need to report it immediately to a supervisor or a compliance officer at their company, whether it's a resident using discriminatory language, or maybe even a contractor saying something inappropriate while in a resident's unit. So documenting and potentially elevating that information is crucial. Silence can be interpreted as complicity under the law. So failing to act can certainly make the company liable.
Yeah. And going back to our second expectation, guys, if you see something that is a potential fair housing violation, but honestly, you don't know, ask. Just please ask. You'd rather ask and find out if it is or isn't than just let it go because you don't know. So don't be afraid to ask in this situation. Leslie, well, what if, like in a scenario, what if the employee isn't directly involved in the potential fair housing violation or incident? Should they still report it? Is it still up to them?
Yes, absolutely report. You don't need to be the one who made the mistake to recognize that something's wrong. So reporting helps leadership step in promptly and respond appropriately before things escalate. And maybe, potentially the leadership of your company may not even have been known about it if you didn't say anything. So every employee is a piece of the puzzle when it comes to protecting the community and the company in general.
Yeah, it makes sense. We talk a lot about fair housing being responsibility, like a top-down responsibility that starts with leadership, it starts with management, and it really does. But the effect of that is that it falls all the way down to every employee, whether that's maintenance, that's leasing, that's management, that's customer service, answering the phone. Everybody has a duty to follow these fair housing responsibilities, and that's not necessarily simple. So remembering what is expected of you and having a culture that reinforces those operations, those policies, those practices is just going to be really crucial to the future of your company and you as an individual for your career. So certainly if you're a manager, please have your employees watch this video so that they understand what is expected of them. As always, we really appreciate everybody supporting our channel. We're going to have a lot more videos coming. Please remember to subscribe, like this video, hit that notification bell so you're aware when we put out new videos every couple of weeks. Leslie, thank you again so much for your time. I really like talking to you about this as it's kind of foundational to everything we talk about in our videos. So it's nice to kind of go back to basics a little bit. Well, anyway, again, I'm Michael Coughlin with the Fair Housing Insiders. Happy training to everybody out there.